There is a silence that terrifies most people. It arrives at night, when the phone stops vibrating, when the room grows still, when there is no one left to distract you from your own thoughts. In that silence, many feel abandoned, unwanted, forgotten. But what if that silence is not your enemy? What if loneliness is not a punishment but a weapon? The world has trained you to fear being alone. It tells you that if you are by yourself, something must be wrong. Yet history whispers a different story. The greatest revolutions of thought, art, and character were not born in crowds. They were forged in solitude. Loneliness, when misunderstood, becomes a cage. But when understood, it becomes power. Today, we will uncover 5 truths about loneliness and how to wield it instead of being wounded by it. Loneliness is not merely the absence of company. It is the presence of yourself in unfiltered form. And that is precisely why it feels unbearable to so many. When you are alone long enough, the performance ends. The personality you carefully constructed for the world grows quiet. The laughter you use to deflect, the confidence you display to impress, the indifference you pretend to feel, all of it dissolves in the silence. What remains is the one person you have been strategically avoiding. There is no audience in solitude, no one to validate your opinions, no one to distract you from your own contradictions. You sit in a room, and suddenly your mind becomes louder than any crowd. Memories surface without invitation. Regrets knock on the door. Old fears replay themselves with unsettling clarity. This is the confrontation most people flee. Modern research once revealed something almost absurd. When left alone with their thoughts for a short period, many individuals preferred to give themselves mild electric shocks rather than endure mental stillness. Consider the symbolism of that. We would rather experience physical pain than encounter our inner world without distraction. That is how deeply we fear self-confrontation. But solitude is not punishing you. It is revealing you. The discomfort you feel is not proof that something is wrong. It is evidence that something unresolved is asking to be seen. Loneliness acts like a mirror placed directly in front of the psyche. And mirrors do not lie. They show you the exhaustion behind your ambition. They show you the insecurity beneath your arrogance. They show you the longing beneath your anger. Truth feels sharp at first because it cuts through illusion. When a young woman experiences a painful breakup, her instinct may be to fill the void immediately. Another relationship, endless messages, constant noise. Anything to avoid the ache. But if she resists that impulse and allows herself to sit in the emptiness, something transformative begins to happen. She notices patterns. She sees how often she accepted crumbs of affection. She recognizes how she silenced her needs to avoid conflict. In the quiet, she meets the version of herself that tolerated less than she deserved. That meeting is painful, but it is also liberating. Because once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. Loneliness in this way becomes diagnostic. It reveals the fractures in your identity. It exposes the roles you have been playing to secure love or approval. It shows you the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be. And though this realization may shake you, it also hands you something invaluable: awareness. Awareness is the beginning of power. A man who feels invisible at work may initially interpret his loneliness as rejection. But in solitude, he might discover something deeper. Perhaps he has been shrinking himself to avoid intimidating others. Perhaps he has been waiting for permission to speak. In the silence, he realizes that his invisibility is partly self-imposed. That realization stings, yet it also returns agency to his hands. Loneliness strips away the comforting narrative that everything is someone else's fault. It asks harder questions. Where did you abandon yourself? Where did you betray your own intuition? Where did you choose safety over authenticity? These questions do not emerge in noise. They emerge in stillness, and stillness, though uncomfortable, is sacred. The person you encounter in that sacred space, flawed, insecure, unfinished, is not your enemy. That person is raw material. Within your fear lies sensitivity. Within your regret lies conscience. Within your longing lies direction. The very traits you try to escape often contain the blueprint of your growth. To sit alone and remain present requires courage. It requires resisting the urge to anesthetize yourself with distraction. It requires admitting that some of your suffering has roots within your own unconscious choices. But when you dare to remain in that space, something subtle shifts. The mirror stops being terrifying. It becomes instructive. You begin to see that your loneliness is not a verdict on your worth. It is an invitation to integration. The fragmented pieces of your personality, the confident self, the wounded child, the ambitious dreamer, the fearful skeptic, slowly begin to acknowledge one another. Instead of running from your shadow, you start listening to it. And in that listening, strength is born. Because the strongest individuals are not those who avoid their darkness. They are those who have faced it without turning away. Loneliness forces this encounter. It removes the escape routes. It corners you gently but firmly until you decide to look inward. The revelation may not be dramatic. It may arrive quietly, a realization during a late-night walk, a journal entry that feels too honest, a tear that surfaces without warning. But these small moments accumulate. They reshape your self-understanding. They turn confusion into clarity. Loneliness becomes the mirror. And once you learn to look into it without fear, it becomes the map, guiding you not toward who the world expects you to be, but toward who you were meant to become. There is a subtle dependency that forms when you are never alone. It does not look like weakness at first. It looks like connection, like popularity, like belonging. But beneath the surface, something fragile begins to grow. You start to borrow your sense of self from the reactions of others. A compliment lifts you higher than it should. A criticism wounds you deeper than it must. Your mood becomes a reflection of the room. And slowly, without realizing it, you hand over the authority of your identity to the crowd. This is why solitude feels so destabilizing in the beginning. When the voices around you fall silent, you are left without your usual mirrors. There is no immediate feedback. No applause to confirm you are doing well. No laughter to signal that you are accepted. And in that absence, a terrifying question emerges. Who am I when no one is watching? Most people rush to answer that question by re-entering the noise. They text someone. They scroll. They surround themselves with conversation. But if you remain in solitude long enough, something radical begins to happen. The external measurements lose their grip. The need for constant reaction starts to weaken. You begin to consult a quieter authority within. Psychologists who study human motivation speak of autonomy as one of our deepest needs, the need to self-govern, to act from internal conviction rather than external pressure. Yet autonomy cannot be developed in constant social immersion. It requires space. It requires the temporary absence of approval. Solitude becomes the training ground, where your inner compass is calibrated. Consider the creator who spends years producing work that no one seems to notice. There is no recognition, no validation, sometimes not even encouragement. On the surface, it appears like failure. But in those unseen years, something far more important is being constructed. Conviction. The ability to continue without applause. The strength to believe in a vision that others cannot yet see. This is psychological independence. It is the moment you realize that agreement is not necessary for authenticity. When you learn to sit comfortably in your own company, you stop asking every room for permission to exist. You begin to sense what resonates with you before checking whether it is popular. Your choices become less about fitting in and more about aligning inwardly. Imagine a young man who has always chosen his career path based on family expectations. He enters a prestigious field not because it ignites him, but because it earns approval. For years, he feels subtly restless. The praise feels hollow. The success feels borrowed. It is only when he spends time alone, truly alone, without the constant reinforcement of others' expectations, that he confronts his dissatisfaction. In solitude, he hears a quieter desire emerging, a different direction, a riskier path, one that may not impress but feels true. That realization is frightening, because independence demands responsibility. When you can no longer blame the crowd for your choices, you must own them. Solitude removes the excuse of influence. It places the weight of authorship back into your hands. Yet this weight is also liberation. When you enjoy your own company, you become less controllable. Flattery loses its power over you. Rejection loses its sting. Inclusion becomes a preference rather than a necessity. You begin to choose relationships, environments, and opportunities not from desperation, but from discernment. There is something quietly formidable about a person who does not need constant affirmation. They enter a room without shrinking or performing. They speak without scanning faces for approval. They listen to criticism without collapsing. Their stability comes from an inner reference point that solitude helped them cultivate. Loneliness sharpens that inner voice. At first, it whispers beneath the noise of insecurity. It questions your people-pleasing tendencies. It challenges your compromises. It asks whether the life you are building truly belongs to you. If you ignore it, it grows fainter. But if you protect moments of solitude, it grows clearer. Over time, that voice becomes louder than the crowd. You begin to sense misalignment quickly. You recognize when you are betraying your values. You notice when you are shrinking to remain accepted. And instead of adjusting yourself automatically, you pause. You reflect. You choose deliberately. This is the transformation solitude offers, from reactive living to intentional living. Independence does not mean isolation from others. It means that your connection to yourself is stronger than your fear of disapproval. It means that belonging becomes a conscious choice, not a survival strategy. It means that you can stand alone without feeling erased. And when you reach that state, something extraordinary happens. The world's noise no longer dictates your rhythm. Trends do not seduce you as easily. Criticism does not derail you as quickly. Praise does not intoxicate you as deeply. You are anchored. That anchor was forged in moments when you felt alone, in the quiet evenings when no one was validating you, in the uncomfortable pauses when you resisted reaching for distraction, in the decisions you made without consensus. Solitude taught you to generate your own direction. It trained you to consult your own conscience. It strengthened the muscle of self-trust, and self-trust is power. Because when you no longer chase approval or beg to be included, you move through life differently. You do not drift with every current. You navigate. You do not wait to be chosen. You decide, and that quiet decision, to define yourself from within, is the beginning of true psychological freedom. Loneliness does something to you that comfort never could. It presses against the walls of your heart until something gives way. At first, it feels like emptiness, like a hollow space echoing with absence. But if you remain present instead of running, you begin to notice that the hollow is not a void. It is a chamber being carved out within you. Pain has a strange architecture. It chisels. It removes illusions of invulnerability. It breaks apart the rigid image you had of yourself as always strong, always composed, always unaffected. And in breaking that image, it creates depth. The person who has never felt alone often lives on the surface of experience. Their emotions are quick, reactive, uncomplicated. But the one who has sat in isolation, who has stared at the ceiling at night wondering why they feel unseen, begins to develop a different relationship with emotion. They no longer fear sadness as an enemy. They begin to recognize it as information. Loneliness slows you down enough to feel what you have been postponing. In a world that rewards constant stimulation, we rarely allow emotions to complete their natural cycle. We distract ourselves before grief can teach us. We silence anger before it reveals its root. We numb longing before it shows us what truly matters. But solitude interrupts that pattern. It removes the anesthetic. Research in psychology suggests that periods of reflective isolation are often followed by increases in creativity and emotional awareness. This is not accidental. When you are alone, your inner life becomes louder. Feelings that were once background noise step forward and demand acknowledgement. Instead of suppressing them to maintain social harmony, you are forced to process them. Consider the man who feels invisible in his workplace. Every meeting reinforces the same silent narrative: you do not matter. At first, his response may be irritation, perhaps even resentment. But in solitude, when he begins writing his thoughts in a journal, something deeper surfaces. Beneath the anger is not hatred. It is longing, a longing to contribute meaningfully, a longing to be recognized for his effort, a longing to feel significant. That discovery changes everything. Anger isolates. Longing motivates. When he recognizes the true emotion beneath the surface reaction, he gains power. Instead of lashing out or withdrawing further, he begins to seek opportunities to express his ideas. He updates his skills. He initiates conversations. What once felt like rejection becomes fuel for growth. This is the alchemy of processed loneliness. When you refuse to let pain turn into bitterness, it transforms into empathy. The space carved out by your own suffering becomes room for understanding others. You start to notice subtle cues, the hesitation in someone's voice, the exhaustion behind their smile, the silence that signals something unspoken. Because you have met your own hidden emotions, you can now recognize them in others. Emotional depth is not dramatic. It is quiet awareness. It is the ability to pause before reacting. It is the discipline to ask, what am I truly feeling? Instead of projecting frustration onto the nearest target, loneliness trains this pause. It interrupts impulsivity. It invites introspection. When you have cried alone, you become gentler with another's tears. When you have questioned your worth in silence, you become sensitive to another's insecurity. The pain you endured privately becomes a bridge rather than a barrier. There is a temptation, however, to let loneliness harden you. To conclude that because you felt unseen, you must protect yourself by becoming indifferent. But indifference is not strength. It is avoidance. True strength is remaining open despite the risk of feeling again. Loneliness refines you only if you allow it to soften you. It teaches you to sit with discomfort without immediately escaping. It teaches you that emotions are not threats but signals. It reveals that beneath every intense reaction lies a more vulnerable truth waiting to be acknowledged. Over time, you begin to notice a shift. Situations that once triggered you intensely now evoke curiosity instead. Instead of reacting impulsively, you reflect. Instead of blaming instantly, you inquire inwardly. You ask what this feeling is trying to reveal about your needs, your boundaries, your desires. This is emotional sophistication. It is not about suppressing feeling. It is about understanding it. The wounds you once resented begin to feel like teachers. The nights of isolation become chapters of initiation. You realize that depth is earned, not inherited. It is carved through honest confrontation with your own heart. And from that depth, creativity emerges. Words become more authentic. Art becomes more resonant. Conversations become more meaningful. You stop speaking to impress and start speaking to connect. Your emotional range expands, and with it, your humanity. Loneliness, when embraced rather than resisted, becomes a refining fire. It burns away superficiality. It exposes the tender core beneath your defenses. It transforms raw hurt into insight. Reaction becomes reflection. Reflection becomes understanding. Understanding becomes wisdom. And wisdom carries a quiet power, the power of someone who has walked through their own darkness and emerged not hardened, but illuminated from within. Loneliness has a way of stripping the paint off your life. At first, you think you are losing something: connection, validation, movement. But what you are truly losing are illusions. And illusions, though comforting, quietly distort your identity. When you are constantly surrounded by others, you absorb more than you realize. You adopt phrases that are not yours. You laugh at ideas you do not fully agree with. You pursue goals that earn admiration rather than fulfillment. Slowly, almost invisibly, your identity becomes a collaboration between your true self and the expectations of the crowd. The danger is not that you are influenced. Influence is inevitable. The danger is that you forget where you end and others begin. Solitude interrupts this blending. When you step away from constant social reinforcement, the borrowed layers begin to loosen. There is no one there to nod in approval, no one there to disapprove. And in that quiet space, questions arise that once felt too threatening to ask. Do I truly want this career, or did I inherit it from family expectation? Do I love this person deeply, or do I fear the emptiness that would follow their absence? Is this ambition an authentic calling, or a carefully curated image designed to impress? These are dangerous questions because they destabilize the structures you have built. But they are also liberating because they return authorship to your hands. In groups, conformity often masquerades as belonging. You adjust your tone to match the room. You soften opinions that might disrupt harmony. You internalize beliefs repeated often enough to feel like truth. The human desire to fit in is powerful. It is wired into our survival instincts. Yet what helps you survive socially can quietly suffocate you psychologically. Loneliness disrupts this pattern by removing the immediate pressure to conform. Without constant feedback, you are left alone with your unfiltered thoughts. Some of them will surprise you. Some may contradict what you have publicly claimed. But in that contradiction lies authenticity trying to surface. Many spiritual traditions understood this long before modern psychology articulated it. Periods of isolation were not viewed as punishment but as purification. The desert, the mountain, the forest, these were not escapes from life but laboratories for self-discovery. In silence, distractions fall away. Without noise, truth becomes audible. Consider those who withdrew from society for deep contemplation. Their insights did not emerge from crowded debate halls or endless chatter. They emerged from long stretches of reflection. In silence, they confronted not only the world's illusions but their own. You do not need to retreat to a mountain to experience this clarity. Sometimes it happens in the quiet of your room after everyone has gone to sleep. Sometimes it unfolds during a solitary walk when there is no music in your ears, only your own thoughts. At first, the silence feels heavy, but gradually, it becomes illuminating. You begin to notice where you have been performing. Perhaps you chose a field of study, not because it energized you, but because it impressed others. Perhaps you remain in relationships that drain you because the idea of starting over feels unbearable. Perhaps the version of success you chase was inherited from social media rather than your own soul. Loneliness forces these realizations to the surface, and yes, they can be unsettling, because once you see the illusion, you cannot comfortably return to it. There is grief in this awakening. You may mourn the years spent pursuing what was never truly yours. You may feel anger toward the pressures that shaped you. But beneath that grief is clarity, a clarity that feels like fresh air after years in a crowded room. When illusions dissolve, what remains is essence. Essence is the part of you that exists before approval and beyond rejection. It is the quiet preference you felt as a child before the world told you what was practical. It is the instinct that whispers even when logic argues. It is the alignment you sense in your body when something is right. Essence does not shout. It does not compete with trends. It waits patiently beneath layers of conditioning, and loneliness, when embraced, peels those layers away. Over time, you begin to feel less compelled to justify your path. You no longer need unanimous agreement. You trust the internal resonance more than external applause. Choices become simpler, even if they are harder. You may disappoint some, you may confuse others, but you no longer confuse yourself. That is the gift of clarity. When hookup culture, career ladders, social expectations, and digital personas lose their hypnotic pull, you begin to live deliberately. You do not chase what dazzles, you pursue what aligns. You do not remain where you are tolerated, you move toward where you are authentic. Loneliness, then, is not emptiness. It is revelation. It separates you from illusions the way fire separates gold from impurities. What burns away was never essential. What survives is resilient. And when you stand rooted in that essence, stripped of borrowed identities, freed from unconscious conformity, there is a steadiness that cannot be shaken by trends or opinions. Because what remains after the illusions dissolve is not fragile. It is you. There is a quiet tragedy in the way many relationships begin. Not with clarity, not with strength, but with fear. fear of going home to an empty room, fear of watching everyone else pair off, fear of sitting alone with one's own thoughts for too long. So we reach for another person, not because we are ready to love, but because we are desperate to escape ourselves. When loneliness feels unbearable, connection becomes a form of anesthesia. You convince yourself that this person is the one, when in truth they are simply the nearest refuge from silence. You ignore incompatibilities because the alternative feels like isolation. You tolerate behaviors that wound you because abandonment feels worse. Slowly, attachment grows not from admiration, but from anxiety. Attachment born of fear suffocates. It clings, it monitors. It demands reassurance not once, but constantly. It transforms love into surveillance. Every delayed message becomes a threat. Every disagreement becomes a signal of impending loss. The relationship becomes less about two individuals growing together and more about two insecurities colliding. But something remarkable happens when you have walked through loneliness consciously. When you have sat in your own silence and survived it. When you have faced your emptiness and discovered it was not emptiness at all, but unexplored depth, you begin to stand differently. Solitude, when embraced rather than resisted, strengthens your self-concept. Psychological research consistently shows that individuals with a clear sense of identity, people who know their values, their boundaries, their desires, form more secure and stable relationships. They do not merge identities out of fear. They connect without dissolving. When you are comfortable alone, you no longer approach relationships from hunger. You approach them from wholeness, and there is a profound difference between the two. Hunger says, "Complete me." Wholeness says, "Walk with me." Imagine a woman who once feared being single more than being mistreated. In past relationships, she tolerated emotional inconsistency because the thought of starting over felt unbearable. But after a season of solitude, real solitude, where she learned to enjoy her own routines, pursue her own interests, sit with her own emotions, something shifted. She realized she could create joy independently. She could soothe herself. She could build a meaningful life without immediate romantic validation. When she enters her next relationship, her energy is different. She does not beg for attention. She does not shrink her needs to remain desirable. She communicates clearly. And if she senses misalignment, she walks away, not from arrogance, but from self-respect. Loneliness trained her to become complete within herself. This completeness does not mean perfection. It means integration. It means you have acknowledged your fears instead of projecting them. You have taken responsibility for your wounds instead of demanding someone else heal them. You have cultivated interests, friendships, and purpose that do not collapse when one person leaves. From that place, love becomes a choice rather than a survival strategy. Connection born of completeness liberates. It allows space. It encourages individuality. It celebrates differences rather than fearing them. Two secure individuals do not cling to prevent separation. They remain because they genuinely value one another's presence. You no longer need constant reassurance because your worth is not dependent on another's mood. You no longer interpret independence as rejection because you understand that closeness does not require suffocation. You trust more deeply because you are not bargaining with fear. There is also a subtle magnetism to those who are comfortable alone. They do not radiate desperation. They radiate stability. Their presence feels calm rather than consuming, and others sense this. People feel safe around someone who does not need to extract validation from them. Loneliness, therefore, is not a curse upon your relational life. It is preparation. It teaches you to enjoy your own company so that you do not demand constant entertainment from another. It teaches you to regulate your emotions so that you do not make someone else responsible for your inner storms. It teaches you to value yourself so that you do not settle for crumbs disguised as affection. And when two individuals who have done this inner work meet, something extraordinary happens. There is attraction, yes. There is passion, yes. But beneath it, there is respect. There is freedom. There is a sense that each person could stand alone, yet chooses not to. That choice is powerful. It transforms love from dependency into partnership, from anxiety into growth, from possession into collaboration. You begin to understand that the purpose of relationship is not to erase loneliness entirely. It is to share existence meaningfully, to witness and be witnessed, to grow alongside another, whole being without losing yourself in the process. Loneliness refines you until you are capable of this kind of bond. It removes desperation. It strengthens identity. It cultivates self-trust. So when connection finally arrives, you do not grasp it with trembling hands. You hold it steadily, not because you fear losing it, but because you know that even if you did, you would still remain whole. And from that wholeness, love ceases to be a remedy for emptiness. It becomes the meeting of two complete souls, choosing, freely and consciously, to build something greater than either could create alone. Loneliness is not the end of your story. It is the training ground. It is the forge where identity is clarified, emotional strength is built, illusions are burned away, and independence is born. The world will continue telling you to avoid being alone, to drown silence in noise, to escape discomfort at all costs. But you now understand something deeper. Loneliness is only a weapon if you learn to hold it. It can cut you, or it can carve you into something powerful. So the next time the room grows quiet, the next time you feel that familiar ache of isolation, do not run. Sit with it. Listen to it. Let it teach you, because the very silence you fear may be preparing you for a destiny that only the self-aware can handle.